Hello guys, and welcome back to another Bukkit plugin tutorial. Today I'm going to show you how to make, well, what you just saw, a rocket launcher. So let's get right into it. The first thing we're going to be checking for here is to make sure that the player is indeed right-clicking. We can do that by using event.getAction. And then we can test to see if the action is a right-click. And we want to check for right-click error specifically. And then here we can go ahead and put our code that we want to use. So I'm going to make an instance of the player. That's not what I wanted to do. Alright. And we can get the player from the event. And then we want to also get the item in their hand to make sure they're holding our rocket launcher item. And after that we want to check the item and make sure it's not null or error. And then after this I'm going to check to see if the item is a bow. I also want to make sure the name is rocket launcher. Now we can get to the fun stuff. The first thing I want to do is set this event to canceled, because we don't want it to run. After this we can go ahead and make an object called falling block. And we're just going to name this falling block, and here we're going to put a few things. First thing we want to do actually is get the world, so we can get that from our player. And then after that we can use the world, and we can use this method called spawn falling block, and it takes a location and a material type. We're not a material type, block data. So we can get the location of our player. We want to go ahead and add one block to it because we want it to shoot from their head height, not from their foot height. And I'm going to make an object for a block data, as I said earlier. And we want to get it from org.bukkit.block.data. And we can get it like this. Or if you don't want to get it like that, you can get the server, and I think you can create block data that way too. But either way works. And then we can go ahead and just pass those two things in here, the location and block data. Before we can set the velocity of the block, we need to get the block the player is looking at. Now you can manually ray trace this, or you can just use the method that I'm about to use here. So we're going to get the block that the player is looking at. In this first parameter, I have no idea what that does, but the second one, that's the distance that it will check. So it will check for any blocks up to 100 blocks away. And then we can finally set the velocity of our falling block. So we're going to do some math here. The first thing we're going to do is use the method called setVelocity. And the first thing we're going to get, or we should put parentheses because we're going to do some math to this vector, but the first parameter you want to put in is the location of the falling block, which I can just use my location variable for this because it's the exact same location. Then from this value you want to subtract another vector, which is going to be the location of this target block. So we can do target.getLocation to vector, just like that. And then outside of those parentheses you want to multiply by, I'm going to do negative so the block goes in the correct direction, and I'm going to do 0.5 because I don't want it to go too fast. Oh yes, I need to convert my location to a vector. That was my issue. And then here you can set any other properties you want. I'll show you some examples. You can do set gravity. You can do set drop item, which will prevent the item from dropping. And then you can also make your block hurt enemies. And also, if you want your block to slow down over time, all you would have to do over here is at the end of your vector, you would have to do dot normalize, and it will normalize the vector. Now to detect when the block collides with another block, you could use a built-in method to Bukkit, but it doesn't detect if the block gets dropped, only if the block gets placed onto the ground. And we want the block to explode no matter what, when it collides. So we need to do the detection ourselves. So I'm going to go ahead and make another class here for ease of use, and I'm going to name it Explosion Timer. And this class is going to extend Bukkit Runnable. You can go ahead and implement those unimplemented methods, and I'm going to go ahead and make a constructor up here so we can pass in a few things. The first of which is going to be our falling block. The second is going to be the vector. So here we can go ahead and pass in our falling block and our vector. Now that we have all the correct values set, we can go ahead down here and check to see if the vector changes. So what we're going to do is check to see if we're going to get the opposite of this value. Falling block.getVelocity is equal to the initial vector. And if it's not, we want to explode the block. But before we set an explosion, we need to do a couple things first. The first of which is get a location variable, because we're going to delete the falling block. And as I said, we can go ahead and remove this falling block. It's outlived its usefulness. And I'm going to get a world variable from the location. And then I'm going to use that world variable to create an explosion at a location. And then here you put the explosion strength. In the demonstration I use 10, so that is what I will use once again. And I can go ahead and cancel this because we don't want this task running anymore. And we can go ahead and return just as so. Now if we go back over to our listener, we can run this scheduler. I'm going to make a variable for it, but you don't have to. This variable is going to be a Bukkit task, and I'm just going to name it task. And we're going to create a new instance of our explosion timer, and we're going to pass in our falling block and our falling blocks vector. Then after that, we're going to type in run task timer, and you can pass in an instance of your plugin. Set the initial delay. I'm going to set it to 0. And then how often you want the task to run. I'm going to run it every single tick. And whenever you're doing your imports, make sure you import the correct vector from org.bukkit.util, or this will not work. I'll go ahead and show you guys what this looks like again, even though you already saw it at the beginning. Alright, so now that we are in the server, I'll go ahead this direction, I think, yes. We're going to explode this big old dragon. Alright. So let's say you're just wandering about your casual Minecraft survival experience, and then you come across this beast. Well, all you have to do is bust out your trusty rocket launcher and hold right click, and that thing is gonna disappear. And as you can see, we're absolutely destroying this dragon. After you conquer your enemy, you can take a step back and look at the mass amounts of destruction that your bow caused. Or sorry, rocket launcher. As you can see, when I shoot the TNT, it is a little inaccurate. And that's only because we used Spigot's method for getting the vector. If you would have ray traced our own, it could be more accurate, but for simplicity's sake, I did it this way. Anyways guys, if you enjoyed the tutorial or it helped you out in any way, make sure to leave a like, and if you have any recommendations, let me know down in the comments below. And I will see you next time. Goodbye.
Nice! The mutt's nuts, in fact.